Welcome to the Plant Cunning podcast.
where we explore our relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York,
We are your hosts, AC Staubel.
and Isaac Hill. Okay, welcome to episode 183 of the Plant Cunning podcast. And today we are honored to have Robert Dale Rogers on the show. Robert is an OG herbalist, educator, writer. He's an amazing guy. And he's put out this new book called Medicinal Lichens. And it's a fantastic book. We're going to talk all about medicinal lichens, about ferns, and how important lichens are for the future. They have some amazing actions on antibiotic-resistant diseases. They're helpful for chemo. There are so many wonderful gifts that the lichens have for us. And so I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. Before we get to it, I just want to remind folks that I am always available for Vedic astrology consultations. You can email me at info@plantcunning.com to schedule a reading with me. This is looking at the karmic blueprint of your life. And I've been enjoying these readings a lot. So also, AC is starting a new school with Gabriel Mojay called the Actea Institute, and you can find this at actea.org. So check that out. And you can also find herb products at travelingherbfarmer.com. Okay, I hope you enjoy the episode. Today on the Plant Cunning podcast, we are honored to have Robert Dale Rogers on the show. And Robert is a fantastic herbalist. He's written this book about medical lichens. He's been teaching plant medicine for 40 years and written over 50 books on plant medicine. Is that right?
Yeah, I think medicinal lichens was number 63. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so you've devoted your life to plant medicine, and that's so amazing. And we feel very lucky to have you on the show and get to talk with you about lichens. And you're also putting out a book on medicinal ferns later this year, which is also very amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we can talk about that as well. So how are you today, Robert?
Good, really good. Yeah, enjoying it. I just recently moved from a big city, Edmonton, to a little town about an hour away, about 20,000 people, where everything's 5 minutes away, and I'm enjoying that. It's time to get out. It was time to get out of the big city,
Yeah.
Have a little more peace and quiet in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we live out in the country a little bit too, and it's nice and quiet most of the time. Yeah. The honey when they're spraying the fields with the manure, that's
Not-
loud.
Yeah.
But it balances out. So you've been doing this for a long time, but what initially brought you into the plant path? How did you come to the plant path?
Well, it's a little bit of a story. I'll make it as short as I can. When I was 6, my uncle came back from the Korean War and lived with us and had developed tuberculosis. And everybody in the house got, affected. I got more so and actually had developed it and was given severe over amounts of antibiotics and things like that. But in the process of that, I didn't know this, but I went into the garden in our backyard and the neighbors, and my mom had these little canning jars under the porch, and I would take them filled with water, put flower petals on them, set them out in the sun, and sit and drink the water. And I didn't realize I was actually, enjoying flower essences when I was 6 years old. And that, I think that led me to a path where I went to university to be a medical doctor. I did 2 years pre-med, didn't like it, knew I'd be kicked out even if I, could finish it up, and changed and got a degree in botany, and then started looking at plants. And it's interesting, just after university, I hitchhiked around South America for part of a year and lucky to be alive. And, but came back and 6 friends, we went up in sort of like a early 70s hippie colony kind of thing. And we bought a quarter of land. We thought, the world's going to hell and we better get, same thing that young people are saying today, it's kind of ironic.
Right.
But I didn't know one single plant.
Uh-huh.
I was a botany, degree, and I didn't know one plant in the woods where I lived. And so that started the journey of the next 50 years of looking at plants, looking at fungi, researching them, writing them, asking, working with indigenous healers. And so that started the journey. Yeah.
That's so amazing. So you're probably in some past lives doing some herbalism of some sort. If at age 6 you intuitively made flower essences.
Right.
Well, the irony is I joined Ancestry, the thing where you follow your lineage,
Yeah.
and culpepper popped up in the
I saw that in
1500s.
your book that
Yeah, I couldn't
you're
believe it. Yeah,
you're
yeah.
in the line of Culpepper. That's so cool.
Yeah, yeah. And my great grandfather was a blacksmith and a herbalist as well. So,
Oh, really?
there might be a little genetics there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So as you started learning about herbal medicine specifically, who are some of your inspiring like mentors or teachers along the way?
I would say there were a number of people. Norma Myers, who was Alert Bay in British Columbia, she was a very early teacher. James Green, I remember. Also, John Christopher. Like, he was like, his book was one of the first ones that even made sense to me. I mean,
Uh-huh.
there were, I picked up early on Jethro Kloss, and it's like, they'll say rheumatism and then 50 herbs that it's good for, but never said really how you prepare them, when you pick them, anything. And so that was all a learning curve. And so I spent time a little bit in California. And then I did a little bit of work in England and then in Spain. And then I spent 2 years in Peru working at times with the curandero who used to do a St. Pedro ceremony, Tuesdays and Friday nights. And I got to chop up the cacti and hang out and observe, healings that, if you weren't there, you wouldn't believe what some of the stuff that went on. So pretty
Amazing.
powerful. Yeah.
Very cool.
And then in 84, I came back to Edmonton. My dad had passed away and my mom was there alone. And I set up my herbal shop and had a clinic there for about 20 some years. And then,
Cool.
yeah. And then I met my wife, the love of my life. And then we both created a little store in a college, and we still have the college online. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. And after 20 years of clinical, I had to give it up because I wanted to do more research and writing. And so,
Yeah. So is that what your practice as an herbalist looks like today, like doing the writing and research and like consultations versus actually like treating people?
yeah, no consultations.
Yeah.
I haven't done that for 20 some years. I like getting, around, I get around to your country and England and Iceland and Canada I like to do conferences and places where I can share, my story of my journey. And also I just finished up co-authoring a couple of books with Matthew Wood. So you probably know Matt, right? And so, yeah, we just finished up pretty much a book it's called An Immune Herbal, and may well be, for the average person, the most outstanding book for not just for lay people, but for herbalists about the immune system. And, we all went through COVID and we know what that was all about. And so I think it's incredible. I mean, he's an amazing writer. I wish I was poetic like him, but
Yeah.
the two of us put something together that I think is going to suit people.
Very exciting. Yeah.
Mm.
It feels good when you're, working on a project and like there's that juice to it, and it's like, this is the hit.
I think you're a great writer, by the way.
Oh, well, that's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah. You
Maybe.
incorporate interesting facts, stories, your voice comes through. So yeah, you and Matt, I'm sure, make an amazing team.
It was fun.
Yeah.
So I'm also interested in like how you've seen the herb world change over the course of your life,
Yeah.
because when you were getting into it, there were only like the Christopher Alexander, there were few books available there. Herbalism wasn't a big thing, and now it's kind of a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
But how have you seen those waves and that cultural transformation happen?
Yeah, well, there are some of the old standards, like people who began the American Herbalist Guild.
Mhm.
A lot of them are friends, of course, David Winston and Christopher Hobbs and Rosemary and whatever. And they really carried the banner for a long time. And unfortunately or fortunately, being isolated in northern Canada, I didn't get to see these people that often. So
Mm.
I never even got to mentor with them. But they contributed an immense amount to keeping herbalism alive. Today, I would say there's a lot of interest. I mean, I taught a course, introductory herbal course for a university for about 16 years up in Edmonton. And there is a growing interest. There's two sides to it. One is very few students wish to delve deeply enough to really learn the patterns and work with people on a deep level. Many people who take herbalism just want to know how to do first aid and what can they grow in their garden or in their kitchen or whatever. So there are those two phases. But I think in general, the industry, if I can use that term, is actually maturing. And so I'm very delighted to see the number of young people who are intensely putting their efforts into understanding it on some deep level and recognize that it's not, like I would say, not to besmirch naturopaths, but very often they'll take a very little bit of herbalism in their 7 years.
Mhm.
And they're kind of green coat doctors, I would say. They
Mm.
they actually know enough that they're dangerous, and in the sense that they use formulas that are already prepared rather than perhaps an apothecary. I consider myself a bioregional herbalist, by the way, and
Mhm.
many of my works have been about plants that really are not as well known by many people. But I'm a real believer that whatever plants grow around your area, pay attention, and those are the ones you need. And those are the best because you can prepare your own medicine rather than depending on perhaps a company that those dried herbs have sat in a warehouse or factory for 5 years before they're, ground up and capsuled. And, it makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and, like, a lot of times when people try herbs and they say they don't work, it's like, "Well, what kind of herbs did you try, a capsule or, like, a powdered form that was, sitting for so long and probably expired years ago? Or did you
Right.
try, like, a local herbalist tincture that they formulated with herbs that they harvested last summer?" So
Yeah, or people go into a herb store and they go, "Do you have a a herbal formula for liver?"
Mhm.
Well, come on. I mean, are we talking hot, cold? Are we calling wet, dry? Are we talking overstimulated, underactive? Like,
Yeah.
really, you got to sit for a while with somebody, and it's not the shotgun kind of, disguising symptoms, which is often a biomedical model. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, those are those deep patterns that have to be learned to actually practice herbalism well.
Yeah. Well, I did for a number of years a 3-year diploma program for herbal students. And the first day I would just tell them knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are a fruit.
Yep.
Mm.
And wisdom is knowing not to put them in your fruit salad.
Yes.
Right.
Right, that's
Yeah. Yeah. So you learn, I mean, you have to start with the basics and then you just slowly accumulate that kind of repertoire of seeing patterns in people's energy. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's cool to hear that in your perspective too, that people are going deeper, like the herb students are going deeper and having more and more confidence to be able to look at those patterns and to really work with people and clients, like to be able to, get to the root cause of these underlying health issues. So I liked hearing that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a number of, colleagues who have put out some pretty amazing herbal books in the last decade that really can guide people to do that, even if it's home study, if they
Yeah.
don't have access to a mentorship or doing clinical sitting in for 1,000 hours with another herbalist to see how to do a proper clinical intake. at least that information now is more available, certainly than it was 20 years ago. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of wonderful herbal books, just put out this book on medicinal lichens. And I guess lichens are not necessarily herbal. Depends on how you define lichens too. But so why this book? Why medicinal lichens?
That's a great question. I would say partly I ran out of plants. I would say that's true.
Yeah. After 6 months.
I've only got about 1,200 plants in my part of the world, herbaceous, trees and shrubs and plants.
Eventually,
but
Yeah.
but also, as I mentioned, back in 2011, I put out the Fungal Pharmacy, a book on medicinal mushrooms, and I put a little 30-page in the back of medicinal lichens, and I always had an interest, and I never had time to really pay attention. And so a few years ago, I actually took a deeper dive and looked and got, totally fascinated with the subject. I only write when I have a passion about a particular subject, and that seems to work for me.
Mm.
But I found that most people ignore them. I mean, when they're right, if even in an urban environment, you walk by and they're all over a tree right there. And, or if you walk in the woods, they're often another color of green that people just kind of don't really take the time to look. And so I think lichens have a lot to offer. It's worth noting that fungi, like mushrooms, which have lots of medicinal value, basically fungi, algae, bacteria, and other types of organisms all combine to actually create the ability for lichens to survive in extreme environments, including everything from a dry desert that's very hot to extreme cold of the polar areas. And so they are tenacious. They actually have learned to cooperate, which, would be useful for more humans to pay attention to, and create a community that is successful where it would not otherwise happen. And so that's part of it. The other is that very often, and I wrote a book a few years ago called Medicinal Mushrooms, the Human Clinical Trials. And I talk about how useful they are as adjunct for oncology, for if you're taking chemo or radiation, whatever. And oncologists will tell people at the very first day that they are coming in that they don't want them taking any supplements while they're taking chemotherapy. And that is scientifically incorrect, right? So the other corollary of that is that lichens have immensely interesting compounds that actually are synergistic with different chemotherapy drugs.
Wow.
That is, they make them more effective at a lower dose. And the dosage of chemo is often what causes, the brain, liver, kidney damage. And if you can take a lower dose and get the same effect, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty useful too. I mean,
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yeah.
For people.
If oncologists would listen.
Yeah.
In 20 years, right? Like they'll come around because it usually takes that
Yeah.
long for science.
Exactly. It takes 20 years for MDs, biomedicine, to catch up with the latest and greatest, right?
Pretty sad.
And then the other side is antibiotic resistance.
Yeah.
There are some lichens. There's one lichen that increases the efficacy of what would be considered to be, not effective anymore, 70 times more effective by combining the lichen with the antibiotic that is useless. So that's
Wow.
pretty interesting. Yeah.
Is that Usnea?
No,
Is that
well,
Usnea?
no, it's not. But
Oh.
Usnea I love Usnea.
Yeah.
I mean, do you pick it for yourself at all?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I do. My mom lives on the coast in Massachusetts, and there's Usnea lining all of the pines and different trees there. We don't have it in central New York, but when I go out west and when I go east, I harvest it. My mom always brings me back a little brown bag of it from her walks, so I have my harvest.
I think it's probably the most well-known of the lichens for
Yeah.
most herbalists and general population. And yep, remarkable for streptococcus,
Yeah.
staphylococcus, tuberculosis. I even had a young 16-year-old who was on 2 years of antibiotics for tuberculosis. And I have a particular affinity for that, having experienced that myself. And they wanted to put her on a 3rd year of antibiotics. And you can imagine what that did to her microbiome.
Yeah.
And 6 months of Usnea, totally erratic,
Wow.
totally.
That's
So
amazing.
it's amazing. It's amazing herb. I really like Usnea.
Yeah.
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 That's probably the only lichen that I even know, really.
Right. Right. Well, there's many of the ones that grow on trees. I mean,
Yeah.
people see them and observe them, and a lot of the ones that are rock are kind of not as well known to people, and they're every color. Like, that's why I was very thankful to Jason, who did all the photography.
Yeah.
Jason Hollinger did those are all his pictures.
Wow.
And I'm always thankful that we hooked up. And yeah, because I could have picked some out of, basically gone to Shutterstock or whatever. I didn't want to
Yeah.
do that. I wanted to have real authentic, a connection.
Yeah, these are some awesome pictures, and
Yeah.
it's so useful to have them to be able to help with identification and confirmation that you've got the right thing and you even know what to look for.
Yeah.
But I think it'd also be helpful maybe to just go take one step back for a second and define, what a lichen is. Because you talked about the symbiosis between the fungi, the bacteria, the plant, like algae. What actually is a lichen?
So I think really to go way back in the day when the first, I would say, chloroplasts, little green blobs of, precursors to algae, full of omega-3 fatty acids, when they wanted to move on to land, they couldn't, because they would be fried in 2 seconds on a hot rock. So they had to connect with pre-existing already fungi and developed a relationship where the fungi provided the infrastructure and protection, and the algae actually could photosynthesize and provide energy, because fungi, like ourselves, cannot make its own food. And so that began the process. And then, of course, there's derivations over the last hundreds of millions of years where different bacteria thought, that's a good idea, I'm going to get in on that, and blah, blah. And here we are today. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that it was thought just algae or cyanobacteria and fungi, that was what they were about. And then a professor, he's now a professor at the U of A, Toby Sprybill, he actually discovered less than 10 years ago that there is a third, and now there's a fourth, and there's a number of bacteria that actually combine to make each lichen unique and able to survive in different environments.
Wow.
So I find that pretty interesting. And it's also, when I looked at the indigenous use of lichens, I also, particularly in British Columbia, my neighboring province, there's a number of lichens there that some of them are extremely useful for food and medicine. And then some of them that have taken on different bacteria, indigenous people knew hundreds and thousands of years ago that you don't eat that one because it actually is not the same. And they look very similar, but over time, people have learned what's healthy, what's not. And so I find, and then what ones are great for medicine, what are good for food, clothing, you can make clothing. They used to make liquors and alcohols out of lichens back in the day, especially in Russia and France, and dyes. Some people are really into colored dyes for cotton or silk or whatever, and including if you want to get some of those very unique blue and purple colors, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, when you look closely at the lichens, like they are so intricate and beautiful.
Mm.
You know, like I don't know. I know most of the plants that are around, but I don't know all the lichens. But you can still can appreciate them, especially on like a moist, overcast day. They kind of just pop out of the trees. You know?
Yeah.
They're gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, like what would be called lungwort, the actual lichen lungwort, pulmonaria, it dries right up on a tree. And then it gets a little moisture and all of a sudden it's green and fluffy and, looked like a big lung, right? And
Yeah.
that hence the name and is good for respiratory problems. So, yeah.
Yeah, you said about lungwort, I believe that native peoples would put it on a plate of water in their house as decoration as well, because it's so beautiful. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a
Exactly.
gorgeous one.
Yeah. Or a few years ago, I had the good fortune to go to Iceland, and they have what was called Iceland moss. It's not really a moss; it's a lichen. And back in I think it was the 1200s, I think they passed a law there that nobody could go and pick Iceland moss on somebody else's property. It was illegal. And it's in every food store. You can go in. It's everywhere. So it's part of the diet of the country. And so, yeah, I would say they're probably the most democratic country in the world.
Yeah. Have you heard this little saying about lichens as a way of like remembering like what they are? Algae, lichens, fungi, and their marriages on the rocks.
Yeah, that's an old joke. I like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Annie algae and Freddie fungus got together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And got married, but now it's on the rocks.
Yeah.
That's a classic. Yeah, I love that one. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just some fun guys here.
Yeah, there's something to that, is that it's not often in nature that many different classes of plants or organisms come together to create something novel and new.
Really?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and in a like symbiotic way too. Like I was, you were speaking about how there wasn't even a word for like symbiotic relationships until I don't know, the 17 or 1800s, but it was like we thought of it as a parasitic relationship, but with the like someone said with the like grace of a statesman or something like that. And so it's like we eventually got to the point where it maybe not every relationship is a parasitic relationship, but maybe there are symbiotic relationships, and the lichens is just an example of that, of how algae needed the body system of the fungi to actually live, and
Exactly.
they work
Yeah.
together in a helpful way. So
Well, I think that it's a lesson for all of us
yeah.
that, that it would not survive without community. And one of the things that I see that seems to be happening is that people are more isolated, that they will, look at their computer, they'll look at their television, and they don't even know their next door neighbor. And then all of a sudden that has become a serious problem in that there's no collective consciousness of how to help and believe that we are all in this together. We're not separate. And when people say, "Oh, I really love nature," we are nature. We're part of nature.
Yeah.
And if we ignore that, at our peril. So,
yeah. And it's also interesting for me in terms of thinking about like where's the agency, where's the identity, like what is the lichen? Is it because it's both the algae and the mycelia, the fungi, like which there's not one it's both of them together. And then think about other life forms like ourselves. I've heard that it's up to 90% of the weight of our body is bacteria and fungi too, in terms of
there's an equal amount. Our microbiome are all these beautiful bacteria that actually, are really, if you think about it, they're outside of our body. They're like in a tube that goes right through us from mouth to anal. And they are there and they do their job and they can be easily disrupted by cortisone or antibiotics. I mean, I did a workshop one time to 300 medical doctors. And I said, would anybody here never have taken an antibiotic in your life? And not one hand went up. Not one. And so we have all been affected, and it's well known that it takes about 2 years for your microbiome to fully recover after one course of antibiotics.
Thanks.
And so that's why I love lichens, is that they're really showing efficacy to really deal with a lot of these problematic infections that are antibiotic resistance. There are a lot of people who don't have infections go into a hospital and they acquire them there.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those are quite nasty. And you'll often hear people die of pneumonia in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't go into the hospital with pneumonia,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So what do you have examples of lichens that are very effective for the antibiotic effects?
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah.
I list probably maybe 80 in the book that are for specific types of infections.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the big six that are often talked about. And I don't know if I can name them right off the top of my head, but, you know, like Klebsiella pneumonia, for example, or, you know, staph. Staph is the classic, including MRSA,
Yeah.
which is becoming really, you know, difficult. And a lot of them actually, the antibiotics, and this was even talked about by Fleming back when he discovered penicillin, that, you know, that they're organisms and they will evolve and they will change.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have bacteria that actually eat and love eating some of the antibiotics that are fed and make them part of their cell walls. I mean, they're evolving way faster than we are. I'll tell you that.
Right.
Right. Faster than we can make new antibiotics.
But MDs give them out like lollipops, even for like viral infections and stuff. So
I know. Yeah, it's becoming a problem, and you can see how the hysteria that went along with COVID and all of the information and misinformation that was put out there, it made it very difficult for people to make decisions about how to take care of their health, right? It actually has created a schism in our society that needs to be healed, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a important point and a complicated point too, because it kind of like a lot of people have just forgot about it.
Yeah, they would like to forget about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Look what it
didn't happen.
Yeah, look what it did to our economies and our societies, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but you know, medicinal lichens, I think they're extremely useful. I also wrote a book on medicinal ferns, the fern pharmacy. And that's another ancient plant, right? We're going now back 300, 400 million years ago. And I'm a real fan of Rudolf Steiner, the anthroposophic, right? Yeah, of course you guys are.
Yeah.
And he wrote that, you know, the ferns are quite immature, right? And so I note in the book, I say, well, that may be Rudolph, but the reality is that ferns have been successful for 400 million years. They didn't feel the need to go any further. They're really, they are their entity. They are what they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
They found what works for them.
Exactly.
We're even a thought.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, ferns are very amazing too, and I know a lot more about ferns than I do about lichens, but that's still not very much. But I know mostly, you know, ferns like ostrich fern for that's edible, and I don't even really know of any ferns being used medicinally. So what are the kind of ferns that are used medicinally?
Oh, there's tons. There's lots. I mean, there's the maidenhair ferns, of course. They're quite prolific. Yeah, and there's a lot of polypodiums. There's so many. And speaking of the ostrich, I basically learned that my dad actually introduced me to those. I used to live in New Brunswick when I was a child. And the St. John River Valley is full of ostrich fern. And we used to go out and pick them. And my dad showed me how to do that and whatever. And then I moved to northern Alberta and I saw all these ostrich ferns. And nobody in the province believed me that they were growing there. And then finally they all figured it all out. And, first year I picked 600 pounds of them and sold them to a grocery chain. But then I started delving into the ostrich, and they have some very interesting compounds that are actually very useful for antibiotic and heart medicine, lung medicine. And so they are also very medicinal. They
Believe it.
contain compounds. Yeah. And so eating them. So, and they don't lose their viability by steaming them or frying them or cooking them in some manner. So yeah, they're very interesting. And well, that book comes out in September, so you have to wait a little bit.
We'll have to have you back on the show then and really
Oh,
dive
that'd be fun.
into ferns.
Sure.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your process for research. I mean, you've written a lot of books, but with this book particularly, you have a lot of indigenous wisdom, and then you share a lot about the compounds chemically and from like a, chemical and scientific standpoint. So what is that process like for you when you're researching for a book like this?
Well, that's a great question. I used to be a clinical professor in family medicine at the University of Alberta. And so I had access to the libraries there. And so that really helped a lot of my early research. And then I had a real fan of people like Nancy Turner, are you familiar with her work at all? You should check her out. People should, because she is probably the ethnobotanist of British Columbia Indigenous medicines. And she wrote a lot about ferns and mosses and lichens and, horsetail and things like that. In fact, my horsetail book that's coming up in a while, she was kind enough to do a foreword for me on that particular interesting plant. So I learned from her and from, Mormon, and wherever I can get my hands on Indigenous literature, I would do that, as well as talking to people. When I lived up north, a Cree healer, Russell Willier, lived just to the west of me, and I knew him for about 35 years. And a professor at the university, Dr. David Young, also knew him, and he'd written a book actually called Cry of the Eagle. And then the three of us collaborated and wrote a book called Cree Healer and His Medicine Bundle, in which he talks about 70 different, 60-some plants and how he uses them. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's very difficult for Indigenous healers, true healers, to share their wisdom. They are usually reluctant to. And so, and anyways, in that book, he talks about a couple of ferns that are of great interest in the area, how they were used for the root. It was dug up and then roasted and eaten for what they would call it fat root, something of that nature. And basically what it did was, it gave nourishment, but it also got rid of the parasites that were intestinal. And like male fern is the classic, parasitic remedy on the edge of dangerous, right?
Yeah.
With dosage. But so I learned here and there. And also, with lichens, I took a little bit of a foray. I wrote a book a few years ago called Mushroom Essences, Vibrational Healing from Kingdom Fungi. And I threw a few lichens in there, including Usnea and reindeer moss, which is actually a lichen, and how they can be used vibrational for different emotional and spiritual conditions. There's not really, the substance isn't there except the energetics. And so there's lots of different ways of looking at lichens.
Yeah. That also makes me curious as well, how the best way to prepare lichens for medicine.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Usnea, for example, get the highest level alcohol you can get. Basically, bottom line, stuff that Usnea, by the way, making sure you correctly identified Usnea, which will have that little, elastic central cord, right?
Red, yeah.
Yeah. And I like to pick it, if it's a recent windfall of a tree, that's great. But then stuff it down there and then cover with 96% alcohol or whatever you can get, or, moonshine, if that, is one of your favorites, something high test. Because I'm a fan of the recently deceased Stephen Buhner, and he suggests that there's polysaccharides in there, which are for the immune system. And I'm not disputing that, but really, if you want a really good tincture that's going to really affect, by bacterial cells, you want a high test. And so just cover it, make sure it's all covered and do it a couple of weeks, shake it. And then you have a superior product. It's interesting, usnic acid, which is in just about every lichen, but especially more prevalent in the Usneas. It works differently than antibiotics. Antibiotics basically work to a certain point of where the bacteria take on the antibiotic, and then they slowly get weaker cell wall, and most of them die off. But a few of them are resistant, and there's where we have a problem. Usnea actually crosses the cell wall of bacteria, whether it's gram-negative or positive, go right in and shut down the mitochondria of the bacteria. Wow. They kill it. They kill it. So it's a different mechanism. Yeah.
That's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And so also with lichens, is there, you recommend the alcohol preparation. Are there compounds that are only solvent in water or alcohol? Like, because I know with mushrooms, oftentimes you'll do a double extraction or even a triple extraction sometimes. Do you do with lichens too, or is it mainly the alcohol?
No. Some of them are very effective. Just adding to your super stew. You can take the lichens, dry them, and then add them in. And there are both soluble, water soluble, and alcohol soluble compounds. Many of the alkaloids, the really strong compounds, are alcohol soluble. But a lot of the polysaccharides, a lot of the things that are more mucilaginous, for example, like Iceland moss, which is great for your respiratory system, water is fine, and you can even capsule if you're into that. You can capsule as well. Yeah.
But I guess the traditional way of eating it is the best way.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with Usnea, actually the most effective way to use it is in oil. Like usnic acid is not soluble in water at all.
Oh.
Quite soluble in alcohol and very soluble in oil. So if you're into it and you want to use it internally, you use an oil, right? So gentle heat, right? And then, and that's what's often used externally as well for tinea, athlete's foot, things of that nature. The oil is the most effective form. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So a salve might be a good idea.
Well, all over Europe, you can buy ointments that are already prepped. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I wonder if putting a little bit of oil, like an oil extract and a tincture extract together internally, would be a good way to take Usnea.
Yeah, I haven't tried that, but
No.
why not?
They do it with cannabis all the time. As an herbalist, I'm always like, why there's an oil tincture?
That's a really novel thought. I mean, maybe it would be very effective. I mean, you'd get the best of all worlds that way. That's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Good idea.
Maybe I'll try that. I have a bunch of Usnea to process, so.
Maybe there's a product coming on the market.
Yes. Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also, so Usnea is maybe the most famous lichen, but are there any other lichens that especially stand out to you as very important and helpful, and ones that people should know more about that aren't well known?
Oh, yeah. Well, like I mentioned, Loberia pulmonaria, the lungwort, of course, and Iceland moss and things like that. But a lot of them are ones that some of the ones that are very interesting grow on rocks. And so you have to recognize that many of the lichens take a long time to grow. Some of them are incredibly slow, and you might see something on a rock that could be 100 years old. Right?
Wow.
And so I'm leery to tell people to go out and just harvest every lichen they see,
Right.
because really some of them are not, it's not appropriate. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But then there are others like Bryoria, which is one that grows on spruce trees, and in northern Saskatchewan next door to me, there's like tons of it per acre, tons. And so, that's one that can be harvested and you can feel good about. And it is really useful, not only for medicine, but also for food. It was used by Indigenous people to actually take and make pit fires, and they would do layers of, say, skunk cabbage over the coals, and then a layer of lichen, and then some onions maybe, or a little fireweed or whatever, and then cover that over for 24 hours. And then they would end up with these cakes that looked like big molasses thick cakes. And those were food that would last for 20 or 30 years. They were survival food.
Wow.
But the contents of that food also contained immune enhancing properties. So they were getting both the benefit of edible, but also unknowingly perhaps keeping them healthy as well. So, yeah. So that's one of the ones I like, and there's a swack of them. I don't know. It would be like choosing your favorite child. Like, how do you do that? Right.
Yeah.
But I think people who know little about lichens would enjoy looking through, seeing what lichens are in their backyard or in their part of the world. Like there's some that are even entheogenic. There's a few of them that have been determined to be in Arizona and Ecuador that have compounds in them. There's one that actually has a psilocybin type compound, related compound. And so these things have been used for thousands of years by cultures around the world. And I just zeroed down on the North American, especially the Indigenous, and keep it to a reasonable size. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And it also, inspires me to go out and learn the lichens that actually, usually it doesn't really grow here this far inland in New York, but there are a lot of other lichens that I haven't identified yet. So,
this book is going to be so important for us, just with, being able to learn more about the lichens in our area. And I'm really grateful that we have it. Yeah.
So I think when you're walking in the woods, very often the one that most people, other than you, Steve, will see on a pathway would be some of the peltigeras, the dog lichens, or the lemon lichen.
Oh, the lemon lichens.
Yeah, and those are very common, and you don't have to worry about sustainability on those. They grow quite quickly and they're plentiful, and they have all kinds of interesting medicine in them. So, just explore, find out.
Yeah, and you even mentioned in your book that it would be good to get a UV light on one of your lenses or loops because
I like that. Yeah, people enjoy that. Yeah,
that's so fun.
Yeah.
I love that.
Jason Hollinger, who supplied the pictures, his partner, she wrote this little thing, and I'll just quote it from you. And it was in a book by Peter McCoy, who's Radical Mycology. And I just read this to you. In lichens, we can find a biological analog for how to build healthy communities, gravitate towards a deeper understanding of the sacredness of relationships, and listen to the dangling murmur of emergent potentialities that can only become whole if we delve into relationships the way that lichens do, fully dedicated to symbiosis, fully present through all seasons of our experience, and always sharing the narratives of place. So I ended the book with that because I really love that quote.
That's a beautiful quote.
Yes.
Well, I think this book is amazing. It's really a gift to everybody because I don't know of another book like this, and it's very useful, very helpful. So you really filled a important niche there, I think. And I'm also really excited for this book on ferns. And then you said you're also writing a book on horsetails.
So it goes in September, we'll have Fern Pharmacy. I like that name. It's kind of a takeoff on fungal pharmacy.
Yeah.
And then in January, next January, moss medicine.
Moss.
The bryophytes, the liverworts, the mosses, that. And then the next one would be club mosses and horsetail. So there's four books coming. So there's a bunch in the road. And way down the road is a book I wrote about a year ago, couple of years ago. It's in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Cacti medicine.
Cool.
Yeah, because
Awesome.
I had experience with St. Pedro in Peru, and and mescaline from peyote in Mexico, but also unbelievable biochemistry in the cacti, mostly New World cacti, most of them are, but the chemistry of them, unbelievably fascinating. So that one's in the pipeline too. So
awesome.
Wow, that's what a series.
Hey.
Underappreciated, underutilized plants and fungi and symbiotic creatures.
No.
The lichens, you said, they're more closely related to humans than to plants.
Yeah.
It's like, wow.
Yeah. They have to figure out a way to feed themselves, right? I mean, plants can photosynthesize, but the fungi, they require that collaboration, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So if folks want to learn more about you and your work, where do you want us to send them to?
Well, I don't have many sites. I'm kind of like my website where I offer a few walks and some products. My wife and I have a company that we distribute the Flower Essence Society, flower essences, like the English and the FES. And we have a line of essential oils that we've had for 35 years in Canada called Sense of Wonder. But we don't ship to the States. It's like a big hassle, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know.
But the site is www.selfhealdistributing, all one word, SELFHEAL, distributing.com. And that's probably the way to check out what we're about. There's 60 some books there that you can order as well. And my wife's an author as well. She has seven books that are quite wonderful.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well,
yeah.
thank you so much.
What about
very welcome. Yeah.
About learning with you? Are you still doing the school?
The school is done online.
Right.
In fact, we just a couple of days ago, we used to do a aromatherapy in-class program, and we just launched it actually an online called Practical Potions. So it's an introductory and an advanced course, and that's available. You'll find reference to that on the Facebook. And for people who want a deep dive into essential oils, which I've always been fascinated with those as well. And so, and there's a lot of mythology out there as well. A lot of MLM companies that are suggesting that you should ingest every one of them, which is absolutely scary. So, yeah.
We need teachers on that for sure. So is your Facebook Robert Dale Rogers?
No,
your Facebook page?
It's Robert Rogers.
Just Robert Rogers.
If you just punch in Robert Rogers Herbalist.
Okay.
Or Alberta or something like that, it'll pop up. Or if I can actually give you, there is I forget the scroll of it, right? It's got some numbers after my name.
Right.
I have it on my Facebook.
Yeah, we can share show notes for folks that you have easy access for.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, I'd love to hear from them. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the Plant Cunning podcast. It was an absolute honor to have you, and we appreciate all of your work and your books and your teaching. So thanks again, Robert.
Yeah, really nice meeting you guys. Take care of yourselves.
Thanks.